My name is Paul Rickter, and I am Chair of the Belmont Warrant Committee. And this is my presentation on the fiscal year 2026 budget for the town of Belmont. These are the topics I plan to cover during this report. I want to talk about the purpose of the Warrant Committee, the process we use to develop the FY26 budget, a quick overview of the revenue and expenses, a sort of a review of the history of expenditure over the last 12 years. I want to spend a little bit talking about what free cash is and what stabilization funds are. And I want to end with an outlook for FY27 and beyond. I wanted to make sure people understand the role of the Warrant Committee. Basically, we are the town's finance committee, and our main role is to advise town meeting on the financial impact of warrant articles. We work collaboratively with the town staff, who are the ones who write the budget, as well as the committees that have decision-making authority over the budget. We don't write the budget, but we are watching the process closely so we can explain it to town meeting and give our advice on whether we recommend a vote in favor of that budget. That explaining takes the form of an annual report on the budget that I urge you to read. At the very least, read the executive summary. We are also empowered to do independent analysis of any financial matter that affects the town. This is the process that we followed to create this year's budget. Outside experts like the Collins Center have been urging us to use a revenue-first approach to budgeting, and this year we did it, and we should keep doing it in the years ahead. Thanks to the operating override that the voters approved in April 2024 and the 3-year plan we developed in the run-up to that vote, we had the resources and a plan. We are now in the second year of that commitment to make the override last for at least 3 years. The budget was developed over the course of 4 public budget summits involving the 4 committees that deal with the budget: the Select Board, the School Committee, the Warrant Committee, and the Comprehensive Capital Budget Committee. At the summits, we used revenue projections and the 3-year plan to set percentage growth targets for municipal and school budgets: 2.5% for the municipal departments and 5.6% for schools. The staff then took that information and created budgets that met those targets. The final budgets were presented in late March, and the Warrant Committee released its report on that budget on April 18. Town meeting will vote on that budget on May 19. I am overjoyed to report that we can present a balanced budget that uses only recurring sources of revenue and that was developed from a revenue-first perspective. We need to keep using this model going forward. Developing the muscle memory of creating budgets in this way will be enormously beneficial to the town as a whole. Here's a really high-level picture of the budget, starting with revenue. The blue wedge is the Prop 2.5 property tax levy. The red is exempt debt. This is borrowing that's been approved by the voters for specific large capital projects, mainly the high school, the rink, and the library. Together, 84% of the budget is covered by property taxes, and as you all likely know, 95% of property taxes are paid by residents, 5% by commercial properties. The remaining revenue are state aid, local receipts, and available funds. Here are the high-level revenue numbers in a table form that shows the comparison for last year. The property tax levy grows by 3.2%. That's higher than the 2.5% statutory limit because the town can assess additional revenue for new growth that occurred during the year, generally for improvements made to existing properties. The levy for exempt debt includes almost all the remaining borrowing for both the library and the rink. Fortunately, we did almost all of this borrowing before the November election, and that decision is going to save the town money. That borrowing is the reason for the 17.8% increase in exempt debt in the FY26 budget. State aid is stable. Both local receipts and available funds are lower, mainly because of actions taken last year that are not taking place this year. Last year, in fiscal year 25, town meeting voted to transfer $1.4 million of interest into the capital stabilization fund. And that transfer is reflected in local receipts line in FY25. That transfer won't happen in FY26, so the local receipts number drops. Similarly, the available funds line includes a $3.1 million transfer from free cash to the override mitigation fund that occurred in fiscal year 25. Without a comparable transfer in FY26, the available fund line is lower. I'll explain more about the override mitigation fund a little bit later in this report. Here's a high-level picture of the expenditure side of the budget. Schools are about 43% of the operating budget, and the other municipal departments collectively about 21% of the total operating budget. Education spending is about double all the other municipal departments combined. Shared services is 32% of the budget. About half of shared services is benefits to current and retired town staff, and about a third is debt service. And most of the rest pays for the facilities department. As you can see, capital is about 4%, and there's $440,000 in transfers to other post-employment benefits, OPEB, which is a fund we're slowly building up to pay for benefits for retired town employees. And here are the high-level expense numbers in a table form as well. The increases in education, municipal government, and shared services are in line with our revenue-first approach to the budget. Note the increase in capital due to the transfer of $1 million from the capital stabilization fund for the rooftop units at the Chenery Upper Elementary School that town meeting approved on May 7. And the other warrant articles item is down because of those transfers to capital stabilization and override mitigation funds that happened in fiscal year 25. At this point, I think it's helpful to look back to how the budget has changed in the past 12 years. These are some numbers that Roy Epstein shared at the budget summit in March that I think are illuminating. Since fiscal year 14, our spending on shared services, as I said, mostly benefits for current and retired staff and facilities costs, have grown by about 80%. Education has slightly more than doubled in that time, about 6% annually. I mean, no criticism of our excellent public schools. This is just to show our spending history. This increase reflects the cost of higher enrollments in the years before COVID. And since 2020, while enrollments have leveled off, the services needed by students have gone up. Meanwhile, municipal department budgets have grown by about 39%. That's about 2.5% as an annualized number. This growth in the municipal budget is really tight and probably not sustainable. We might need to find more funding from municipal departments in future years. Finally, I added excluded debt to this table, an eye-popping 248% growth. This is the interest we're paying on several large building projects that are done or in progress. If you remember back to 2013, we had a daunting number of major building concerns. What to do about the high school, the rink, the library, the police station, and the DPW facility. Fast forward to 2025, we have solved all of those concerns for everything but the DPW with solutions that will last for decades. Solving these building challenges is an enormous relief, but this is the price tag. And it's one of the reasons why residents feel so squeezed when they look at their property tax bills. I want to do a quick rundown of two important concepts: free cash and stabilization funds. Making analogies between municipal finances and household finances often doesn't work, but I think this one does. The undesignated fund balance, or free cash, is like the balance of money that sits in your checking account after you've paid your monthly bills. If you're fortunate, there's a reasonable balance of money that sits there in your checking account. And if you're very fortunate, that checking account balance might grow from month to month. In the case of the town, where departments can spend no more than what town meeting authorizes, almost inevitably, they end up spending less. Those turnbacks accumulate and our balance of free cash grows each year. This accumulation of free cash is a common feature of municipal government in Massachusetts. The state requires cities and towns to certify their free cash balance each year in the fall. Multiple groups of outside experts on municipal finance have recommended that we treat free cash as one-time funds that should never be used on recurring expenses, though we have in the past violated that advice by using infusions of free cash to keep the budget in balance. Instead, best practice is to treat free cash as a rainy day fund for a major financial crisis. We have financial policies that require us to keep a minimum of 3 to 5% of the operating budget as reserves for that purpose. In the past 2 years, we have adopted a new policy that is based on analysis done by the Warrant Committee on the history of free cash. We believe that free cash can be depended upon to grow each year by at least $3 million, and that $3 million can be appropriated annually to the operating budget. Both the fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26 budgets include that $3 million of free cash as a recurring revenue source. If free cash fails to accumulate $3 million in any one year, we will need to revisit that policy and find other sources of revenue or reduce expenditures. This chart tracks the recent history of free cash since fiscal year 2019. The green bars represent the free cash that carry forward to the next year, and the blue bars represent the new free cash that accumulated each year. Together, the green and blue bars each year represent the free cash balance that we certified with the state. The free cash balance got up to about $15 million in fiscal year 24, but it's recently stabilized at a smaller amount. The purple circles represent the amount of free cash that we used to balance the budget. That number got as high as $10 million in fiscal year 24, a completely unsustainable number. In recent years, we've agreed to a stable and recurring amount of $3 million of free cash to use as a revenue source each year. The purple line levels off in recent budgets. The graph also shows green X's representing transfers to stabilization funds that we've made in recent years. Stabilization funds are my next topic. Now, to continue the household analogy, if free cash is like the balance sitting in your checking account, stabilization funds are like your savings account. Money that you transfer out of the checking account during good times so you can use them in the future for specific needs. The state allows town meeting to create stabilization funds, both for designated purposes or for general purposes. Funds that are created for designated purposes can be appropriated for those purposes by a majority vote of town meeting. Funds that are for general purposes require a 2/3 vote. Here's a listing of the current balances of free cash and stabilization funds. This table shows the balances on the left for our general purpose funds that are considered our operating reserves, our rainy day fund. 3.9 million is in general stabilization and 4.3 million is in free cash. Together, that totals about 8.2 million or 5.6% of the operating budget, which meets our reserves policy. I'll also note we have $4.5 million in the override mitigation fund. I'll talk about the override mitigation fund in a minute. That's money that we are planning to spend in the next 2 years and was created to fund our 3-year plan for the 2024 override. On the right are our dedicated reserves, money that we are holding for specific purposes. Capital stabilization is a fund we are using to help pay for various capital projects. This slide is already out of date. On May 7, town meeting approved a transfer from capital stabilization for rooftop units at the Chenery, and this fund is now about $1.9 million. In addition, we have the Kendall Fund, which was set up using money from an insurance settlement after the fire at the Kendall School. We periodically use the Kendall funds for specific capital projects. The Asheville Landfill Stabilization Fund is money that we will spend capping the incinerator site when that project is ready. Finally, the Capital Endowment Fund generates interest that is spent annually on capital projects. We don't spend the principal of this fund, only the interest. I want to look ahead to how the fiscal year 27 budget will be created, how we will continue to develop the muscle memory of creating revenue first budgets. New this summer will be a permanent multi-year budget advisory committee made up of members of the 4 key committees plus the senior staff who create the budget. This group will meet publicly over each summer to create and maintain a multi-year model for projecting revenues and expenses. This multi-year model will help the budget summit define how much revenue is available each year, with an eye on what level of growth is sustainable and the timing and size of potential future operating overrides. To give you a sense of what this multi-year budget advisory committee will need to think about, I put this slide together to give a look back a few years and a look ahead a few years to give everyone a sense of how we got here and where we could be going. The green bars show expenditures each year, and the blue, red, and sometimes orange bars show revenue sources. The blue bars show our regular recurring revenues, and the red shows free cash that we use to keep the budget in balance. I'll note that the green and blue bars go down much further than this chart shows. I cut it off at $110 million, but it goes all the way down to 0. I want you to notice the size of the free cash used in fiscal year 23 and particularly fiscal year 24. Starting in fiscal year 25 and continuing after that, we see the $3 million in recurring free cash in red. Same size bar every year. Notice that the blue bars showing our regular revenue sources are always struggling to keep up with our spending. However, in 2024, voters approved an override, and that got the blue bar to go up in fiscal year 25. You'll notice it takes a big hop up in that year. That allowed us to balance the fiscal year 25 budget with only $3 million in free cash. That continues in FY26, where we are again able to balance the budget. But long-term, expenditures tend to grow faster than revenues. So in fiscal year 27, we expect to use some of the money in the override mitigation fund to balance that budget. This is following through on the plan we developed before the 2024 override. In fiscal year 28, the gap gets wider and we use the remainder of the override mitigation fund. If you look really closely, you'll see there's about $1 million deficit projected in fiscal year 28. It is way premature to predict anything with that level of with this level of precision, except to say that the current anticipated growth in spending creates a potential budget deficit starting as early as fiscal year 28. I show FY29 and 30 on here just to show the potential trajectory of widening deficits. We need to either slow the growth in spending or find additional sources of revenue, and likely both. Keeping a close eye on spending and revenues will help reduce the size and frequency of future overrides. This is a quick rundown of some of the potential sources of uncertainty in the years ahead. Part of prudent budgeting is accounting for sources of uncertainty when possible. In closing, I want to say thank you, especially to my fellow members of the Warrant Committee, the Comprehensive Capital Budget Committee under the leadership of Chris Doyle, the Select Board under the leadership of Elizabeth Dion, and the School Committee under the leadership of Meg Moriarty. These are the 4 committees that have worked together during the budget summit process. In addition, I want to thank the town staff who are responsible for creating the budget, Town Administrator Patrice Garvin, and Assistant Town Administrator and Budget Director Jennifer Hewitt, and the municipal department heads and all of their staff, and School Superintendent Dr. Jill Geiser and Director of Finance Tony DiColigiero and their staff. And I want to give a special shout out to the extraordinary leadership of School Committee Chair Meg Moriarty. Thank you.